The alarm on Drell 3 screamed for the third time in an hour. Dr. Salah's grey fur stood stiff under the medical bay's cold light. 4 screens blinked behind him, full of human diagnostic code his technicians could read but not understand. 72 hours. That was how long it had been since the last human medic left this station, since Earth's teams packed their gear and walked to the transports without a single goodbye. One readout kept looping the same pattern over and over, a shape the machine had never shown before. Salah leaned closer. The plague strain on the screen had changed shape twice since midnight. It had never changed twice in one night before, not when the humans ran this bay. "Run it again," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. The technician beside him, a thin Lumian named Ket, shook her head. "I have run it 4 times. The result does not change." She looked at the human keyboard she had never been trained to use. "I do not know what half of this program is asking me." Salah had built his entire career on Drell 3 Medical Wing. 50 years of partnership with Earth had made this station one of the safest outposts in conclave space. Now the humans were gone, and the machines they left behind spoke a language no one else had bothered to learn. No warning, no handover, no one left to ask. He pressed his palm flat against the console, feeling the vibration of the ventilation system that had never once failed under human maintenance. Somewhere in the wing behind him, a patient's monitor spiked, then steadied, then spiked again. The screen in front of him flashed a single word neither he nor Ket could translate, and beneath it, a countdown began. Salah reached for the console. His claw hovered an inch from the keys. He did not press it. Would you have walked away, knowing what waited on the other side of that door? Thorne did. Stay close. This is where it started. 7 votes, 50 years. It started long before the alarms. The voting results flickered across 1,000 holographic screens in the conclave chamber, high above Drell 3 and every other outpost that depended on it. Red numbers dominated the display. Dennied. Again. Ambassador David Thorne sat very still. Around him, 200 species shifted in their seats, already moving on to the next item of business. The human question had been settled as far as they were concerned. Case closed. He rolled his right shoulder once, an old habit, an old injury that never quite healed. 25 years of council service had taught him to read a room before it finished forming its opinion. This room's opinion had been formed a long time ago. Speaker Vethkor's scales caught the chamber light, a deep blue-green that had not darkened, not yet. He adjusted his kelp fiber robes and reached for the next agenda item, mining rights in the outer reaches. Business as usual, as though the vote that had just ended meant nothing at all. Thorne stood. The chamber did not go silent right away. It took a moment for 200 species to notice that the human ambassador was on his feet without being called. Patricia Walsh, seated 2 rows back, straightened. Commander Stevens, the scar across his jaw catching the light, went still. "The people of Earth thank the Galactic Conclave for the opportunity to serve alongside you these past 50 years, Thorne said. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. As of this moment, we are withdrawing all human personnel from Conclave operations. We wish you well in your future endeavors." For a moment, no one in the chamber moved. Then every human delegate stood at once. Walsh, Stevens, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, whose steady hands had saved more lives across 200 worlds than any conclave record could count. Engineers, mediators, translators, all of them rose together and walked toward the doors without another word. Vethkor's gill slits fluttered once. He let out a low, wet sound that might have been a laugh in his species and called after them, "You will be back. Humans always come back." Thorne did not look back. The chamber doors slid shut behind the last of them, and the sound was smaller than he expected. 50 years, and it ended with a door closing quietly. The tablet was still in his hand. Obsidian black, 8 inches, etched with the seal of the conclave. It had delivered every rejection. This was the 7th. He slid it into his coat pocket and walked toward the transports without slowing down. Patricia Walsh caught up to him in the corridor. "You're really doing this, all of it. Medical, engineering, mediation, everything." "All of it," Thorne said. "They'll call it a bluff for at least a week." "Let them." Thorne rolled his shoulder again. "We're not bluffing." By the time their shuttle cleared the Conclave Spire's outer ring, Walsh already had a list open on her tablet. Every human team, every outpost, every desk with a human name still on the door. 47 kilometers of orbital station behind them, humming with the same rhythm it always had, unaware that the rhythm was about to change. New Geneva received the recall order within the hour. Walsh stood at the center of the operations floor, a dozen holographic displays glowing around her, each one a different corner of conclave space. "Bring them all home," she said. "Every team, every station, every mediator, 1 week." On Drell 3, Dr. Tanaka sealed the last container of diagnostic equipment and set it by the door. Dr. Sala watched her from across the room, his grey fur unsettled, his voice low. "The protocols are complex," he said. "There are subtleties we have not grasped, not yet. Then I suggest you study harder." Tanaka did not soften the words, but she paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "The manuals are all on the system, every one of them. Read them. We assumed you would always be here to explain them." "I know," she stepped through the door. "That was the mistake." At the Kepler Drift border zone, the human peacekeepers boarded their transports under sky striped with 2 moons. For 6 years, they had kept the Kree and the Lumian delegations from open war, translating not just language but temperament, patience, and pride. A Kree elder named Thrice watched them go, mandibles clicking in a slow, uncertain rhythm. "We are confident you will resolve your differences peacefully," the departure message read. Thrice did not believe it. He had sat across from Lumian negotiators for 6 years, and he knew exactly how thin that peace had always been. On the conclave spire itself, the human engineers began shutting down the monitoring stations they had built into the station's bones. Sensor arrays, pressure relays, trajectory calculators that had, without anyone quite noticing, been quietly correcting for 100 small errors a day. "Should we leave instruction manuals?" a young technician asked her supervisor, one hand resting on a console she had maintained for 3 years. The supervisor shook her head, already reaching for her bag. "They never asked for them before. I doubt they'll read them now." The console powered down. Somewhere below, in Drell 3 Medical Bay, an alarm was about to scream for the first time. The alarm did scream, less than a minute later. Sala's claw came down on the console before he could stop himself. The readout froze, then reset, then began looping the same corrupted shape it had shown 4 times already that night. Behind him, a patient's monitor flatlined for 2 full seconds before stuttering back to a weak, uneven rhythm. "Ket," he said, "get me the containment protocol, Section 9. Ket's fingers moved across the human interface, slow and uncertain. "I don't know where Section 9 is. The index doesn't match what you're describing." "Then find someone who does." There was no one who did. That was the problem no one had said out loud yet. By the 7th day, the plague strain on Drell 3 had mutated twice more. By the 16th, the first confirmed patient deaths reached the local news feeds. By the 20th, the Drell planetary government declared an emergency and sealed 3 districts, and Sala sent a message to Earth that he rewrote 4 times before sending. The reply came back within a day, brief and polite, from a desk that was no longer Tanaka's. "We are confident your medical professionals will find a solution." Sala read it twice. Then he set the tablet down and did not pick it up again for an hour. At Kepler Drift, the silence lasted 11 days before it broke. The Kree elder Thrice had spent those 11 days trying to hold a peace he no longer had the tools to hold. Without human mediators, the translation systems between Kree and Lumian dialects drifted, subtle at first, a misread tone here, a wrong inflection there. On the 12th day, a Lumian trade envoy used a phrase that meant respectful caution in formal Lumian and open threat in the dialect the translators defaulted to. The Kree fleet read it as a threat. 17 ships were destroyed before either side understood what had happened. Thousands of crew were lost in the first exchange, and by the time both fleets pulled back to a wary distance, no one in either delegation could say who had fired first, only that the silence that used to hold them apart was gone. Thrice stood on the observation deck of his flagship, mandibles still, watching the debris field drift past the viewport. He had spent 6 years learning to trust the humans who stood between his people and the Lumians. He had never learned to do it himself. "We are confident you will resolve your differences peacefully," he said aloud to no one. The words tasted like ash. On Talon 7, the asteroid had been tracked for 11 months. The Conclave engineering team had the human deflection formulas. They had run the calculations 3 times, checked them against the archived models, and confirmed the numbers matched exactly what Earth's engineers had used 100 times before without incident. What the formulas did not account for was a gravitational shadow cast by the station's own mass, a correction so small that human engineers had made it instinctively, without ever writing it into a manual, because it had never once occurred to them that anyone would need it written down. The thrusters fired exactly as specified. The asteroid's trajectory shifted, but not enough, not in the right direction. It broke apart on approach, and 2 fragments the size of small moons slammed into the orbital platforms that ringed Talon 7's mining operations. 50,000 workers died in under 4 minutes. Among them was a woman named Aura Vantel, 31 years old, who had spent a shift break that morning teaching her nephew how to fold paper birds over a comm link, because he'd asked her to, and she never said no to him. The last message she sent, 40 seconds before the first fragment struck, was a photo of the little paper crane sitting on her console, wings slightly crooked. Her nephew kept the photo. It was the only thing of hers that survived. The conclave chamber had never been this loud. 200 species tried to speak over one another, the translation matrices straining to keep pace, half the words lost in the noise. Speaker Vethkor pounded his gavel 3 times before the chamber even registered the sound. "Order," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, something that had never happened in 127 recorded sessions. "Order, or I will." "You will what?" a delegate near the back shouted. "Call the humans to restore order. They're gone. You made sure of that." Vethkor's scales darkened, a deep, agitated blue that spread from his throat to his shoulders. He had assumed, for 50 years, that competence was something owed to the conclave, not something offered freely and capable of being withdrawn. He was beginning to understand the difference, and the understanding sat in his gut like cold water. Dr. Salah stood. He had traveled from Drell 3 himself, uninvited, and no one had stopped him from entering. His grey fur was matted, his eyes hollow from 3 sleepless days. "We need them back," he said. His voice did not carry the way Thorn's had. It shook. "This is not about pride. This is about survival. 50,000 people are dead on Talon 7. A plague is spreading on Drell 3 that none of us know how to read. Ships are burning at Kepler Drift. We built 50 years of civilization on top of a foundation we never once thanked, and now it is gone, and none of us know how to stand without it." No one answered him. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting had been. In New Geneva, Patricia Walsh watched the reports come in on 3 separate screens, her jaw tight, her hands still. 4,317, she said quietly, to no one in particular. That's how many major crises we resolved for them over 50 years, 800 a year with us there, 200 without. The difference was never in the numbers. She looked up at Thorn, who stood at the window behind her, his back to the room. It was in the lives. Thorn rolled his shoulder, an old habit that had not left him even now. He did not turn around. "They'll ask for us back," he said. "Soon." "How soon?" "Soon enough that it will hurt them to ask." He watched the lights of the city below, steady and human, and entirely their own. That's the part they haven't understood yet. Behind them, a new alert flashed on Walsh's console, marked urgent, marked from a name neither of them recognized. A formal request for private audience, filed not through the conclave's usual channels, but through a diplomatic backdoor reserved for only the highest office in the chamber. The Arch-Mediator's office. Walsh read the message twice before she spoke. Selenra wants to come here, in person, alone. Thorne finally turned from the window. Then let her come, he said, and let's see what 200 years of pride looks like when it finally runs out. Selenra's shuttle broke atmosphere over Cape Town before dawn, and it did not wait for clearance. That alone told Thorne everything he needed to know. In 50 years, no arch-mediator had ever traveled without a full diplomatic escort, without advance notice filed through 6 layers of protocol. Selenra had informed no one. She had simply come. Walsh met him in the hallway outside the conference room, her tablet still lit with the overnight reports. 17 ships gone at Kepler Drift, 50,000 dead on Talon 7. A plague no one can read on Drell 3. And now she's landing alone, unescorted, 2 hours ahead of any message announcing her. Walsh's jaw was tight. Something's wrong, or something's about to be. Let's find out, Thorne said. The conference room in New Geneva was quiet when Selenra entered. She was smaller than the chamber made her look, her ceremonial robes hanging looser than Thorne remembered, the kelp fibre gone a dull, exhausted grey instead of the vivid gold that marked confidence. She had prepared a speech. He could see it in the careful way she'd dressed, the data case clutched against her chest. She looked at Thorne, she looked at Walsh, and the speech, whatever it had been, did not come. "I am here to beg," she said. The words left her mouth before she seemed ready for them, and something in her posture buckled slightly, like a structure giving way at a seam no one had checked in years. "We treated you as helpful primitives," she said. "We never understood you were the scaffolding holding our civilization together." Her 4 eyes moved between them, unblinking. "I have seen civilizations rise. I have seen them fall. I am 230 years old, and I did not understand until 3 days ago that pride is a luxury only the strong can afford. We are no longer strong. We have not been strong for 50 years. We simply never had to find out." She set the data case on the table and opened it. Inside was a tablet, obsidian black, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Not the Conclave's tablet, her own. 40 years of my personal records, she said. 4,317 crises resolved because a human happened to be standing in the right place at the right time with the right knowledge. An average of 800 a year with you there, 200 without. Her voice did not break, but it came close. We voted 7 times that you were unworthy of a voice. Then she did something no arch-mediator had done in recorded conclave history. She bowed, a full, formal bow, low enough that her robes pooled around her on the floor, the posture reserved for subordinates addressing the highest office, not the reverse. The room was silent long enough that Thorne could hear the building's climate system cycling overhead. He looked at the tablet on the table between them. Black, dormant, not so different from the one still sitting in his coat pocket, the one that had carried 7 rejections. He thought, briefly, of Aura Vantal's nephew, somewhere on Talon 7 right now, holding a photograph of a paper crane that was the last thing his aunt had ever made. "Sit down," Thorne said gently. "Please." Selenra straightened, slow, unsteady. She sat. She stayed for 6 hours. Walsh brought coffee that went cold twice. Thorne listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was mostly questions. How bad was the plague, really? How many ships remained at Kepler Drift? What would it take for the conclave to actually mean the apology instead of just surviving long enough to offer one? Selenra had answers to all of it, and every answer was worse than the last. "The chamber is fracturing," she admitted, near the end. "Species are not waiting for a vote. Dozens have already opened private channels to Earth, offering to negotiate outside conclave structure entirely. If the vote fails, I do not think there will be a conclave left to fail it again. Thorne rolled his shoulder. It was a small movement, one Walsh had seen 1,000 times across 2 decades of watching him work, and she knew what it meant before he said anything. Then we don't wait for the vote either, he said. We start now. Partnership agreements, direct with any delegation willing to sign. Medical support to Drell 3 first, no conditions. The conclave can catch up to us or not. Selenra's gill slits fluttered. You would help us, even after this. I'd help Drell 3, Thorne said. Not the conclave. There's a difference, and I think you're the only one in that chamber who's finally learned it. The mundane part came before the hard part, the way it usually did. Thorne spent that evening at his desk doing paperwork that had nothing to do with any of it, signing off on a housing allowance request for a returning engineer, approving a shipment manifest, the small unglamorous machinery that kept New Geneva running while a galaxy rearranged itself outside its windows. He drank half a cup of tea and let the rest go cold. Ordinary work, on an ordinary evening, while ships still burned 2 systems away. Then Walsh knocked, and her face told him the ordinary part was over. Drell 3, she said. The plague strain mutated again. 3rd time this week. Salah's team thinks they're close to a containment protocol, but they need someone who's actually worked with the human formulas before. Not a manual, a person. Thorne was already reaching for his coat. Send Tanaka. She's already gone, left an hour ago before I even asked her. Walsh's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Guess she didn't need to be told twice. The chamber vote was scheduled for 6 days out, but the real turning point came before any ballot was cast. It came on the 7th night, when a message reached New Geneva from a Cray delegation at Kepler Drift, not through conclave channels, but direct, addressed to Thorne by name. They wanted to negotiate a ceasefire with the Lumians, not through the conclave's mediation office, through Earth. Thrice's voice was on the recording, steady despite the exhaustion underneath it. We do not trust the translation systems anymore. We trust the humans who used to run them. If you will send someone, we will hold our fleet at current position and wait. Walsh read the message twice, then looked up at Thorne with an expression he hadn't seen on her in years, something close to disbelief. They're not waiting for the vote, she said. None of them are. The conclave hasn't fallen yet, and they're already walking out of it. Thorne stood at the window, the city lights steady below him, and for the first time since the 7th rejection, he let himself feel something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief. Something in between. Then we'd better be ready before they finish walking, he said, because whatever comes next, it isn't going to look anything like the conclave we just left. Behind him, Walsh's tablet lit up with another incoming request. Then another. By morning, there would be 6 more, from 6 different delegations, none of them waiting for permission from a chamber that no longer had the authority to grant it. By morning, the number had grown to 11 delegations, then more than that by noon, until Walsh stopped counting and simply started answering. The conclave vote came 6 days later anyway, because Selena insisted on it. If we are going to change, she told Thorne over a secure channel, we change as a body in the open, where every delegate has to look at what we did. Not quietly, not while pretending nothing happened. Thorne agreed to attend, not as a petitioner this time, as Earth's permanent representative, a title that had been rejected 7 times and was, for the 8th vote, no longer up for debate at all, only the terms of what came next. He wore the same coat he'd worn out of the chamber 6 weeks earlier. The same tablet sat in the same pocket, still carrying nothing but old rejections, waiting to be replaced. Speaker Vethkor stood at the podium one final time before the vote. His scales had not fully returned to their old confident blue-green. They carried a permanent undertone now, something duller, something that did not fade even when he was calm. He had spent 50 years assuming his authority was owed to him. He understood now that it had only ever been lent. I will not pretend this vote is a choice, he said to the chamber. It is an acknowledgement. We built a civilization on a foundation we never once thanked, and it held so well for so long that we forgot it was a foundation at all. We called it service. It was partnership. We called it small. It was everything. His gill slits fluttered, slow and even. There is nothing left to vote against, only how much dignity we have left in how we vote for it. The vote was near unanimous, not out of love. Selenra had said as much, weeks earlier, in the quiet conference room in New Geneva, and she had been right. It passed because the alternative had already shown its face on Talon 7 and Drell 3 and Kepler Drift, and no delegation wanted to see it twice. Thorn watched the tally climb on the great display, red numbers turning to green one block at a time, and he did not smile. He had not come here for a victory. He had come here because Drell 3 needed medical supply lines restored by the following week, and this was the fastest way to make that happen. Dr. Sala met Tanaka on the observation platform above Drell 3 rebuilt medical wing 3 months later. The plague was contained now, had been for weeks, but the wing still carried the scars of the crisis in its patched conduits and mismatched panel colors, repairs made in a hurry by hands that hadn't built the original systems. We assumed it would always be here, Sala said, looking out over the wing. The knowledge, the people who held it. We took it for granted the way you take gravity for granted, right up until the moment it isn't there. Tanaka nodded slowly. Now you understand. I understand that partnership is not a resource, it's a relationship. He turned to look at her. We are trying to be better at it, not because the conclave told us to, because we finally learned what it costs to lose. Behind them, a junior technician, Ket, the same one who had stood beside Salah on that first terrible night, successfully ran a diagnostic sequence without help, start to finish, and did not need to ask what any of it meant. Talon 7 rebuilt slower than anywhere else. 50,000 names went up on a memorial wall at the edge of the new mining platform, etched into dark stone that caught the light of the system's twin suns. Somewhere among them was Aura Vantal, and somewhere on a station 3 systems away, her nephew kept a photograph of a paper crane in a frame beside his bed, wings still slightly crooked. He was 7 years old. He did not fully understand what the wall meant yet. He only knew his aunt had liked folding paper, and that people came from all over now to look at her name and stand quietly for a while before they left. Thorn's return to the chamber, 3 weeks after the vote, was quieter than anyone expected. He did not make a speech. He sat in the seat that had been reserved for Earth's delegation for 50 years and had stood empty for 6 weeks, and he listened to the first item of new business, a formal request for medical partnership from a delegation that had voted against Earth's membership 6 times out of 7. Ambassador Jorrell, crystalline form catching the light in sharp, uneven refractions, made the request himself, his voice carrying none of the old certainty. We would ask for priority medical support, given the circumstances at our outer colonies. You'll be added to the queue, Thorn said. Behind Drell 3, behind Kepler Drift, behind every delegation that reached out to us directly in the 6 weeks before this vote passed. He said it without heat. We help our partners first. Those who waited to see which way the wind blew can wait a little longer for the wind to reach them. Jorrell's form flickered, agitation visible in the shifting light. This is petty. No, Thorn said. This is priorities. He did not raise his voice. He never needed to. That evening, back in New Geneva, Thorn sat alone at his desk. The tablet was in front of him, the same obsidian black surface, the same conclave seal etched into its corner. He picked it up and turned it over once in his hand, the weight of it as familiar as it had been the day he'd carried it out of the chamber for the last time. Its face was blank, dormant. It no longer carried rejections. Over the past 6 weeks it had carried something else entirely. His signature, again and again, on partnership agreements with delegations that had never once bothered to vote for Earth's membership, when a vote might have cost them nothing at all. Dozens of them now. Direct alliances, trade routes, medical exchanges. A new shape to the galaxy that no single conclave vote had ever authorized and no conclave vote could now undo. The seal of the conclave meant nothing on the tablet's surface anymore. It was just an old mark, worn smooth, on a device that answered to someone else now. He set it down on the desk and did not pick it up again. Walsh found him there a few minutes later, a folder of new requests under her arm, and stopped in the doorway when she saw his face. "You look like a man who just won something," she said. "I don't feel like I won anything." He rolled his shoulder, the old habit, softer now, almost absent. "I feel like a door finally closed." "Which door?" He didn't answer right away. Outside the window, the lights of New Geneva stretched toward the horizon, steady, unhurried, entirely their own, no longer waiting on a vote from anyone. "The one we spent 50 years knocking on," he said finally. "Turns out we didn't need it open. We just needed to stop knocking." Walsh set the folder on the corner of his desk and left him to the quiet. Thorne stood, crossed the room, and looked out at the city below. Somewhere out there, a supply convoy was loading medicine bound for Drell 3. Somewhere else, a Kree fleet and a Lumian delegation were sitting across a table from one another, with a human mediator between them for the first time in months, both sides finally speaking a language they trusted again. He did not think about the vote anymore. He did not think about Vethkor's dulled scales, or the memorial wall on Talon 7, or the 7 red numbers that had once filled 1,000 screens. He thought about the tablet on his desk behind him, blank and quiet, no longer waiting for anything. Take the helpers for granted, and they will leave. Treat them as equals, and they will stay. The window held the last of the evening light. Below, the city kept moving, steady and sure, the way it always had, the way it always would now, not because anyone had voted for it, but because no one needed to ask permission anymore. Thorne stood there a long while, watching the lights come on across New Geneva, one building at a time, until the whole skyline glowed against the dark.